Good morning and welcome to the village of Fotheringhay, and it is hay at the end. When I was doing the research for this one, a lot of the websites spelt it without a H on the end, but it is Fotheringhay because the name Fotheringhay dates back to a definition that was something along the lines of a clearing in the forest for the production of hay, so hay has to feature. But anyway, we're going to do Fotheringhay today, fairly shortish and compact walk, and the stars of the walk without a doubt are the church, which is behind me, and the castle, from where a lot of the village history emanates from. Fotheringhay existed in the Domesday Book. It was mentioned in the Domesday Book, but it really took off during the reign of King William I, William the Conqueror as it were, and his decision to put a castle here. And quite a lot of the historic buildings in the village have some connection or other with the castle. Why did he build a castle here? Well, it's considered to be a position of strategic importance. You had the river here. I mean, we've got a bridge that goes over the river now, but prior to that it was a ford. I think adjacent to where the castle is rather than where the bridge is now, there was a ford that people crossed. It was considered to be close to the fenland area, and William always saw the fenland area as an area where attacks, rebellion, call it what you like, had come from already and could come from again. It's between Oundle and Peterborough. It was near Rockingham Forest, so it just kind of was a logical place to put a castle. So it's his idea to have a castle built here, and that sort of kicked off the more historical elements of Fotheringhay, even if it was here prior to his day. So we're going to have a wander over said bridge and go and find the castle, and that will kick off our walk. The first bridge was built here in 1573 by order of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth I, who probably got fed up of crossing the river by a ford. So the first bridge on his spot, 1573, I think it was 1722 if I remember correctly. It was rebuilt to what you see before you now. I don't think it's grade 2 listed. It probably should be at 1722 date, but it's a lovely bridge. It is now the main route from the western side of Fotheringhay. Just crossed over to the other side of the bridge now. The mound in the background, it is the motte, or the mound on which the castle was built. We will walk around there in a moment, but just to give you a different perspective, that was the castle area on the mound, and to the right of the mound, and I think that's where the ford was supposed to be. Nobody seems too certain, but I've seen references to it being adjacent to the castle, and that would have been right in front of us. It's a lovely bridge, but really doesn't have a pathway next to it, so you've got to be careful when you're crossing this one. Good to see some early snowdrops appearing, and we're still in January, only just. Not quite out yet, but getting there. Some of these buildings on the right here, which belong to Castle Farm, as the name suggests, was actually around at the time of the castle. So these are pretty old buildings. I'm not saying this one in particular, but some of the farm buildings, do date back a long time. Right, let's do the big kid thing and climb up on top of that mound, or motte as it's known, down here either side of us. We'll get a better view when we get up there. is where the moat used to be. Can't have a castle without a moat, which used to run around the mound, but also on the other side. As I say, you'll get a better view from up high if I've got the legs to get up there. The actual chap who built or oversaw the building of the castle was a chap called Simon de Senlis, whose name cropped up, I'm pretty sure, in the Sawtry Village Origins video that I did. So he had a big say in the development of Sawtry Village as well. He was the Earl of Northampton, if I recall, and he was very much one of William the Conqueror's men that he brought over, which he sort of dotted around all over Peterborough as well as all over the country to represent him and his interests. And it was him in around about 1100 who was responsible for the building of this castle. It was in the early 1200s that in effect the castle was taken over by the royal family, and it stayed, I think it was King John initially, early 1200s, and it stayed in the royal family thereafter for some significant time, in fact until its demise really. And it has big links with both the royal family here in England and also the royal family in Scotland, which we'll come on to in a mo. So it was a castle and a settlement of some significance. Right, we are up. As you can see, it's not a huge amount of amount of space. So it's not a huge castle. We're not talking Windsor Castle here at all. It was a small castle, but of significance. Right, let's have a look down. Right, you see the moat on the left there, going out past that tree to that lump in the background, and it would swing round to the river. And the reason it did that is it wasn't there just to protect what is up here, which is the castle. It was to protect that ground in front of us, that sort of tongue-shaped piece of ground with lots of lumps and bumps on it. And that was the bailey, and the bailey contained a lot of other buildings. The castle wasn't just what was up here. It was buildings down here, many of which were there for the support of the people who lived in the castle. But you also had a chapel down here, you had a great hall. I'm assured from some of the websites that I looked at that sort of bump and lump in the background there running across the back of the bailey was where the great hall was. The significance of the great hall was that was where Mary Queen of Scots was beheaded, and she was beheaded here at the instruction of the Queen Elizabeth I. Ironically, Mary was here as a guest of the castle initially until Queen Elizabeth decided she was up to no good and was a danger to her throne, and that she was plotting things and heaven knows what, and decided she was just too risky. She became imprisoned and didn't last too long before she was beheaded in front of an audience in the hall at the back of this piece of land. See, there are lumps and bumps here, and I'm sure if you dug down there'd probably be a little bit of something under the surface. But there's actually no walls or stonework left up here on the mound, but down there, and we'll pop down there in a mo, down there in that caged area in front of us, there is the remaining part of the wall. I can only assume that when they demolished it up here, that chunk of stonework rolled down, nearly ended up in the river but didn't quite make it, and it stayed there ever since as a sort of only surviving stonework left from the castle. Worth mentioning before we clamber down from the bank here and move on out from the castle that the church very much was born out of the castle. Without the castle there wouldn't have been the church as we see it today. Reason being is that that church was built as what they called a collegiate chapel. It was built by the people at the castle at the time as a sort of, it was a kind of monastery. It appears on maps as a nunnery in places, so whether it was more female than male I don't know, but it was built to house a number of priests. I've seen reference to it being a sort of training ground for priests, but actually as we saw in the, I think it was the Cotterstock video, it was built as a chapel for priests to have a very strict, almost monastic daily routine of prayer, where they would say prayers for the people at the castle, and I think for the House of York as well, because the theory back then, as we covered in the Cotterstock videos, if you had people saying prayers for you during the time you're alive, and also during the time immediately after you pass away, then those prayers will count in your favour when it comes to moving on in heaven and getting a place where you want to get a place in, and quickly. So it was a kind of say prayers for people, and those peoples will be looked after in the afterlife. And if you'd got the money, that's what you did. You set up a chapel, a collegiate chapel, and had people say prayers for you. Seems a bit crazy, but it was the thing at the time. And that was set up originally, as I say, as a collegiate chapel, which is why it's so big and grand. But there's a lot more to it than that, but I'll save that until we actually get round to the church itself. But it was very much set up by the people in the castle for their benefits. Just looking down on the moat at the back of the bailey, as it was called. As I mentioned, up on the hill, up on the mound, it was here pretty much in front of me where the Great Hall was within the bailey, and it was the Great Hall where Mary Queen of Scots was beheaded in 1587. You can read up on all the gory details, but apparently the first chop didn't quite work and they had to go back for a second chop to cut her head off completely. Gruesome stuff, really. Why did they do that? But yeah, it would have been right in front of us. That's where she ended her life. Let's go and have a look at that remaining piece of wall. There you go, it's the only remaining and very substantial piece of walling from the castle, which, as I suggested earlier, almost certainly fell down off the motte, off the mound at the top of the hill there, in memory of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots. Beheaded on the 8th of February, and they're not sure whether it was 1586 or 1587, so it could have been a year out earlier. Memorial was placed here in by the Stuart History Society in 1964. I think there's a rival plaque just along. King Richard III, youngest son of Richard, Duke of York, was born in this castle October the 2nd, 1452. And that's in the Richard III Society, which is quite a fanatical group, still going today. I think they were responsible for, in some way, the digging up of the remains of Richard III in a car park in Leicester. I might be wrong, but that's where his body was found and exhumed, or his skeleton, fairly recently. www.richardthird.net. A lot of water on the river. That's a useful illustration on the information board that shows what we were talking about earlier, with the castle up on the mound on the right there, and then all the other buildings on the lower grounds where we've just been walking across, and where Mary Queen of Scots met her maker, as it were, with the moat flowing around to the river at the back. So that picture probably makes more sense than my explanation. When we come out from the castle area onto the main street through Fotheringhay, there's only really one road that goes through the village, with the places of historical interest on both sides. When we get there, my cunning plan is to go down the left hand side of the road first and cover what is there. That includes the church. So we go down the left hand side of the road first to the end, and then we'll turn around and come back down the right hand side. If we don't do that, I'll be zigzagging non-stop from left to right, and I don't want to do that. So we'll concentrate on the left and then come back on the right. I think it'll work. We'll see. Now, the buildings that you'll see first in the distance where the cars are, they used to be in effect lodging houses, accommodation houses for the castle. So basically, when they had guests at the castle and they couldn't fit them all in, they'd put them in here. There's also one on the other side of the road, but we'll cover that, as I say, when we come back. It used to be known as the Old Inn, because as well as providing accommodation, it was a hostelry that would serve drinks as well. It's now, I think, 7 or 8 cottages. It's been carved up, it's been partly rebuilt, but the building itself in some form has been here since the mid 1400s. And like I say, it was kind of an overspill accommodation block for Fotheringhay Castle. And the building on the other side, which you will see on the way back, is known as the New Inn, because it's slightly more recent. Very unimaginative names. It's a bit more glamorous, the one on the other side, but we'll save that till later. The doorways are probably the oldest part of these buildings now. I'm looking for number 14, which is the one with the lantern on over there. That wooden door surround on that particular door dates right back to the beginning. It's very old. It's mid 1400s. And I think that is literally the oldest part of this entire block. I'm not going to wander over there. But the doorway to number 14, it's the wooden surround actually around the door. Is the oldest part of the building. The Church of St Mary and All Saints. Magnificent building. I'll tell you a little bit more when we get around the back. It's a bit difficult to film through the trees here. There she is, a magnificent building. I can remember when I first saw this church that I thought, well, two things struck me. First of all, why has a small village like this got such a magnificently large, almost cathedral-like church? The two didn't really fit, no disrespect intended. The answer to that is, as we mentioned earlier, it was really set up as more than just a church, but as a college by the castle owners for their own benefit, for prayers to be said for them and for the House of York, to benefit them in their afterlife more than anything else. Second thing that struck me was it looks out of proportion. That tower, that magnificent, powerful tower, looks too big for what is on the ground, on the bottom level. And it's only quite recently that I discovered that is because the original church extended to the right, so that bottom layer there would be twice as long. Now if you imagine it being twice as long with that tower, it would be a cathedral virtually. It would have been massive. The reason it's now smaller is because originally the church was in the grounds of the castle. It got moved here, I think, in the early 1400s in its full glory, but it lasted as long as our friend or enemy, depending on your point of view, King Henry VIII, who had fallen out with the church because of his failure to get his divorce authorised by the church. He thought, I'm not having that, I'll set up my own church and I'll do some damage to the old one. So he sent his people around the country basically stealing and demolishing anything of significance relating to the church, and this building was of significance because it was a college and no doubt a college with some wealth involved as well. So they took a look at it and they thought, well, we're going to demolish the college part, but we'll leave the rest of it, because sort of I think it was around about the late 1400s, the sort of front end of the church, which is the bit we're looking at, became the parish church. It was used by the villagers as a parish church, and the bit that we can't see because it's been demolished to the right was the college. So in the dissolution of the monasteries era, they got rid of the college bit, took an axe, chopped it down the middle, got rid of it, and just left this bit, which is why it looks a bit wrong, because the tower is much bigger than it should be for a base like we've got. It's kind of a squat cathedral-like church. Still looks fantastic though. The architecture is known as the perpendicular style for obvious reasons. Everything is tall, thin, slim, pointing upwards, and yeah, magnificent, especially on a day like this. The church has always had a very strong connection with the House of York because of the Yorkists that used to live at the castle. There's a lot of Yorkists, members of the House of York, that are entombed and buried within the church, and it's become a sort of what do you call it? It's a place where those that still have a fanatical interest in the War of the Roses and supporters of the House of York, they still see this as somewhere that they make pilgrimages to, just to see those that are buried here, and the very many things inside the church, which you may be able to get into in a minute. I'll try if we're lucky. Plenty of things in there relating to the House of York, so it's always been a shrine, if you like, to the Yorkists from the Battle of Roses, which I always found a bit weird really, because the House of York and the House of Lancaster, it always has sort of links and connotations with Yorkshire and Lancashire, but really that's a bit false, because much of the key elements of the House of York and indeed the House of Lancaster were nowhere near Yorkshire or Lancashire, but they've always been linked to the two counties and still are today. Let's go and see if we can get in, or let's have a wander around the church first and then we'll try and get in. The magnificent tower, mighty tower. I always get fascinated by church graffiti. Can't really see dates on these. You'll always find them if you look hard enough. Some of it will date back a long way, maybe some of it not so far back. Can't read it. Looks like 1810 as a date at the bottom of it. Might be wrong. Let's say 1850. Am I imagining things? Perpendicular architecture. Very nice. I'd rather have Norman any time, and or Anglo-Saxon, but very nice. The area in front is where the other half of the church would have been, the college end, so it would have extended out onto this flat area, which is now covered in gravestones. Right, that is what I hoped I might see at this end, because this would have been, this wall, the middle of the church originally, and you can see that faint arch going up and around that centrepiece there, and that would have been, well, it would have been an open arched entrance into the other half of the church, the college half of the church, which King Henry's men put an end to and demolished, and then his buttresses were put up to prop up what was left, I guess. But yeah, you can at least see that there was clearly something extending out from this building. You can just about see another arch actually to the right of the centre one, and I guess there's one on the left as well that also used to move through into the long gone other half of the church. Nice old chest tomb there. I think that's grade 2 listed from what I recall, dates to the mid 1700s. Can't read it, but yeah, mid 1700s. In loving memory of Robert Spriggs, who died 1916, aged 75 years, and also of Jane Elizabeth, his beloved wife, who died 1941. Well, at least I can see the date on that one. Thomas Stevens, who died 1865. That's about all I can read, but I'll see if I can find something out about Thomas. Right, let's see if we can get in. We'll be disappointed if we can't, because it's a kind of cross between a church and a museum almost. There's some fantastic things in there to explain what has been going on here over the past centuries, and a few bits and bobs worth seeing. So yeah, let's go and try and get in. Fingers crossed. Well, at least the gate's open. That's promising. Yeah, it looks good. There you go, a model showing the church as it originally was, double the length. And in the foreground there's a number of buildings there that used to be there in support of the college. It wasn't just a church, it was had its own mini village really to support the college. Very good. It's just a list of the supporting buildings that used to exist around the church. It's the plan of the building. That is what is still here. And that is what is gone. As I said earlier, if you're into your House of York, this is the place to come. There is just reams and reams of all the history that you'd want to know about the House of York. There's two rather large tombs here either side of the altar, which again, these are key players in the House of York, and I cannot remember who was buried here, and I'm not even going to try and interpret anything. I think that's just graffiti. You can read up on it, but they were both House of York key players. Lovely church. I've had the privilege to shoot a number of weddings in here as well. It's a good place to get married, great light. Plenty of white rose Yorkist emblems around the building, as you might expect. It's a magnificent pulpit. That dates back to the 1400s and was actually donated to the church by no one less than King Edward IV. So it should be grand. 1400s, tremendous. Known as the York window. Contains a lot of the emblems from the House of York, including King Richard III's emblem, which is the boar in the middle of the middle window. That was his, King Richard III's personal emblem. White roses everywhere. Everywhere you look. Richard III's boar. Interesting. Clearly there was a previous Anglo-Saxon church on the site, as is often the case. An old Victorian, I think they're called Biers, B-I-E-R, might be pronounced differently, dating to Victorian times. If you passed away in the village, this is how the body in a coffin would be transported from the house to the church and for subsequent burial in commemoration of the 60th year of our good Queen's reign, June the 22nd, 1897, VR. Seen a few of these in churches. They tend to survive. Right, before we leave the church, just a mention of this little creature, the lion that sits inside the sort of entryway to the church, the porch. This used to be in the castle. It came from the castle. When it was demolished, it ended up in Oundle in a pub called the Lamb. And I think it was the 1970s it was given back to Fotheringhay and was eventually placed where you see it now. The stone lion of Fotheringhay Castle. Yeah, fantastic church that really is, inside and out, and there's nowhere better to go after the church than to the one and only surviving pub in Fotheringhay. If I can find it, of course I'll find it. I know where the Falcon is. It's coming up to the Falcon. I think I've got some pictures or a picture of this scene pretty much. think the building dates back to about 1800, although I found an old newspaper report from 1873 that said that it had been granted a licence, presumably to sell beer, so it may only have become a pub in the sort of later 1800s. It's still going today. Blacksmiths Cottage, which I guess was the cottage where the blacksmith lived. The blacksmiths was down here at the bottom on the left. I think that was the forge, late 1700s. And that is Orchard Cottage, which goes back to the late 1600s. Yeah, looks like an old blacksmith's forge. Lovely old door. Building over there is College Farmhouse. The building to the left of it, the little one squeezed in the middle, is older, 1700s. The farmhouse itself is 1800s. And they both sit on the site of an even older farmhouse that was clearly lost at some point, but they're both listed buildings. The building in the centre there with the big chimney stack shows on old 1800s maps as being the post office, which I'm sure it was. Don't think there's any clues on the building, but it was a long time ago. Trying to grab a sneaky look at the last sort of historical house at the bottom end of the village, which is listed, known as Tall Trees, and I suspect it's right at the end there, underneath the tall trees. Bit of a clue. Dates to the early 1800s. Some nice windows on the side of it. About as good as I can get. I've sneaked round the back to get some shots of a very lovely building. Tall trees, early 1800s, grade 2 listed, and looks wonderful. Very nice. Right, we will now return down the other side of the main street in Fotheringhay, where plenty of history is lurking, if I can find it. The first place to find is the old school, which I think only closed relatively recently, I think about 2004, I might be wrong. I was a bit suspicious about the reference, but it also says it dates back to the 1600s and was actually set up by the Collegiate Church. So again, a link back to the castle really. And used to be an old grammar school. It's hard to believe it's a 1600s school. There it is lurking in a distance there. It could be. Don't think I've ever seen a surviving school of that sort of age before. It was certainly the village school, that's for sure. Whether it survived until 2004, I find that hard to believe. Grab a glimpse. There it is. Very nice. Village Hall. And it's got a date stamp. 2000. That was a long time ago. Not really. One day it'll be looked back on as being a historical building. Not in my lifetime. Nice though, nicely done. Sympathetic to the village, I would say. Fotheringhay, spelt correctly. Village Hall. The thatched house ahead is actually called the Thatched House, or the Thatched Cottage if you prefer. Dates back to the late 1700s. Believed to have been a barn originally, or a house and a barn. I suspect this bit was the barn, to be honest with you. I don't know. How do I know? But that's the Thatched Cottage, very nice. The last remnant of thatched buildings in Fotheringhay. There aren't many more. Nice 1930s red phone box, the obligatory red phone box. The two houses date back to the early 1800s. Two of many buildings that were either built by or tidied up by a guy called Thomas Belsey, who used to hold the manor here in the early 1800s. And Thomas was responsible for a lot of smartening up of the village. A very generous guy who very much shaped many of the buildings that you'll see, including those coming up behind these cars, which look remarkably similar to the one we've just seen. Yeah, his name is in effect stamped on much of the village. These are all Thomas Belsey built buildings. I guess as the guy who held the manor, he probably felt a responsibility to keep the housing stock here in good shape and looking good, which they still do. And that behind the wall was Thomas Belsey's manor house. Not just Thomas Belsey, but it was the manor house. Quite interesting old photographs of this one. They all look different. The extension on the left there just wasn't there in some of the photographs I've got. So one assumes, even though it's been nicely blended, that was a later add-on. One of the photos certainly only had the middle section and the section to the right. So I suspect they're the older bits. Probably a better angle of the manor house to compare with the photographs, which were taken from similar positions. Taking a quick detour off the main route, because somewhere down here there is a Grade 2 listed bridge. Can't resist seeing that. You'll know this bridge well if you've driven from Fotheringhay down towards Nassington. It's the bridge, you see someone coming towards you, you put your foot down because you want to get to this sort of single lane bridge before they get there. Only to find when you put your foot down and you reach the bridge, you take to the air, because it's an old school humpback bridge, and if you hit this one too hard you will leave the ground and fly, much to the amusement of the younger members of your family no doubt, and probably wreck your car. But this is it. This is grade 2 listed, dates back to the 1700s. It's believed there was an earlier bridge before this one was built, which I'd love to have seen. But this is old enough for me, 300 years plus. There you have it, a 1700s grade 2 listed bridge. Still in heavy use today, looking strong. The waterway is Willow Brook, by the way, which has always fascinated me. Rises up on the other side of Corby and runs all the way down to finish near Elton on the Nene. There is a video that I did on the course of the Willow Brook. I'll put a link to it somewhere at the bottom of the video, which was a fascinating, for me anyway, journey from the very source of Willow Brook to where it finishes today, which is not far downstream from here. On my old 1800s map, it showed that there was an old sheep wash exactly in front of the camera there, and that is it, I'm sure. You can just about make out the shape of an enclosure, which if I got over there, which I can't, would be stonework underneath that ivy. And that's where they'd wash their sheep, presumably before taking them onto market. Not sure how they got the water up from Willow Brook, as it's well below it, but that is the sheep wash. Some lovely old buildings down here I can't tell you much about. It says it's the old vicarage, so it is. The old vicarage, which one? That one? I don't think so. It could be. Grange House. I would have thought that was the vicarage, but I'm not sure. We'll call that one as the vicarage.
Afternoon.
Hi, all right. I can remember walking down here before and seeing an old water pump, and I've lost it now. Kind of disappeared. Surely I think it's behind these gates actually. Yep. Yep. Let's have a read. Don't know if you can read that. Fotheringhay village pump, circa 1640. Restored in 2002, 1640. That's impressive. I wonder if when they say restored it actually works. I doubt it. That's good to see. 1640s water pump. Now when we came in and saw the old inn, this is the other side of the road, this is the new inn. And these were also supplementary accommodation for the castle. Look at those old windows on that. That is old. Lovely building. Let's see what it says on the wall. A fantastic doorway at the bottom. Attributed to King Richard III, 1452. I think that's just a plaque commemorating him being born at the castle. But yeah, this used to be part of the extended accommodation block for the castle. I just love these ghost doorways, and these are old. This is 1400s, 600 years old. And that's the biggest part of the old new inn. I can't call it the old new inn. The new inn, I mean. How old is that? Answer, 1400s. Look at the architecture on there and the mouldings. Superb. It's a pity that you can't get better views of these fantastic old buildings. It's not often you see a 1400s building. I know it's been modified since, but bits of that are 600 years old, hidden away behind hedges, and you know, I respect that, but love to see more of it. There you go, that's Fotheringhay for you. I hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, I quite enjoyed it actually. It's quite it's a lovely morning, blue sky, sunshine, cold, but who cares? And it's just a nice village. It's nice and peaceful, nice and quiet, plenty of history in there. It's got a castle, it's got a church. What more could you want? So as I say, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it, and anything you want to comment on, anything you want to put me right on, please add your comments. Don't be shy, put it under the video on YouTube, or if you prefer on Peterborough Images, and that's it. So thank you very much for joining me and keeping me company, and I will no doubt see you out and about sometime very soon.